He had always been the life of the party. Mark Jenkins possessed a charisma that could fill a room, a knack for knowing the right people, and an almost preternatural ability to read the energy of a crowd. It was no surprise when he found himself working for some of the biggest names in the music industry, but nothing prepared him for the job that would change everything. Party recruiter for Sean Diddy Combs. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Mark's career in entertainment had been steady but unremarkable until he landed a gig as a freelance event coordinator for a high-profile awards after-party. It was there that he caught the attention of Diddy's team. They saw his potential, his connections, and his almost supernatural ability to make any event a night to remember. Within weeks, he was offered a role unlike anything he had ever dreamed of, curating the guest lists for the most exclusive parties on the planet. Working for Diddy was like stepping into another universe. The hip-hop mogul's world was one of opulence, power, and excess. Mark's job wasn't just about filling a room, it was about crafting an experience that exuded luxury, exclusivity, and a sense of being at the epicenter of culture. Every guest had to fit the vibe, whether they were A-list celebrities, fashion icons, influencers, or up-and-coming artists with a buzz. One particular incident stood out in Mark's memory. It was a sultry summer night in Miami, and he was tasked with organizing a party at a sprawling waterfront estate. He had spent weeks coordinating with agents, stylists, and publicists to ensure the guest list was flawless. As he walked through the venue, checking last-minute details, one of Diddy's close associates pulled him aside. "Mark, the boss wants more models," the man said, his tone casual but firm. Mark blinked. "We already have a ton of models on the list," he replied. "Yeah, but he wants more, younger. You know the type," the associate said, giving him a look that made Mark's stomach twist. Mark did know the type. Over the next few hours, he scrambled to find more women who fit the vague yet precise criteria. It felt strange, almost transactional, but he pushed the discomfort aside. This was the price of working at the top, he told himself. As the months went by, Mark began to notice more troubling patterns. There was an almost cult-like loyalty required of Diddy's inner circle. People who displeased him didn't just lose access to the parties, they disappeared from the industry altogether. Whispers about financial disputes, ruined careers, and broken friendships floated through the grapevine. But no one ever spoke openly about it. Mark's own unease grew when he was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement that was far more restrictive than anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't just about protecting Diddy's brand or business interests. It felt like an attempt to silence anyone who might speak out about what happened behind closed doors. The breaking point came during a party in Los Angeles. The event was held at a palatial estate tucked into the Hollywood Hills. Mark had outdone himself, curating a guest list that included A-list actors, Grammy-winning musicians, and some of the most recognizable faces in fashion. But as the night wore on, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. There was a room guarded by security that only certain people were allowed to enter. Mark wasn't one of them. He tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the whispers among the staff told a different story. One server confided in him that she had seen young women, barely out of their teens, being escorted into the room. Another mentioned overhearing heated arguments about deals being made behind closed doors. Mark's curiosity got the better of him. Using his status as a trusted member of the team, he found a way to slip past the guards and into the restricted area. What he discovered would haunt him forever. The room was lavishly decorated with plush seating, dim lighting, and an air of secrecy. But it wasn't the decor that caught his attention, it was the atmosphere. The conversations were hushed, the laughter forced. Several young women sat uncomfortably on sofas while older men in suits and designer clothing hovered nearby, engaging them in conversations that seemed anything but casual. Mark felt a surge of anger and disgust. He knew the entertainment industry was rife with power dynamics, but seeing it play out so blatantly was something else entirely. He left the room as quickly as he had entered, his heart pounding. That night, Mark made a decision. He couldn't be a part of this world anymore. Not if it meant turning a blind eye to behavior that felt exploitative at best and predatory at worst. But leaving wasn't as simple as quitting a job. He had seen too much, and he knew too many secrets. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mark began to distance himself from Diddy's team, taking on smaller, low-profile events to pay the bills. But the more he tried to leave that world behind, the more he realized how deeply entrenched it was. People he thought were friends stopped returning his calls. Rumors about him being difficult to work with began circulating in the industry. It was clear that he was being blacklisted. Mark didn't let it stop him. He began documenting everything he had witnessed, every questionable request, every suspicious interaction, every detail about the inner workings of Diddy's parties. He knew the risks of speaking out, but he felt an obligation to expose the truth. One night, as he was sifting through his notes, he received an anonymous message. "Be careful who you trust. They're watching you." It was a chilling reminder of how powerful the forces he was up against were. But Mark wasn't deterred. He reached out to a journalist known for exposing corruption in the entertainment industry, sharing his story under the condition of anonymity. The journalist was skeptical at first, but became convinced as Mark provided evidence to back up his claims. When the exposé was published, it sent shockwaves through the industry. While the article didn't name Diddy directly, it painted a damning picture of the culture surrounding his events. For Mark, it was both a victory and a loss. He had done the right thing, but it came at a steep cost. In the months that followed, Mark struggled to rebuild his career. The entertainment industry had little tolerance for whistleblowers, and he found himself shut out of opportunities he once took for granted. But despite the challenges, he felt a sense of liberation. He had walked away from a world that, beneath its glittering surface, was darker than he could have ever imagined. Mark's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most glamorous worlds have shadows. Though he lost much in the process, he gained something far more valuable: his integrity. And while he may never attend another star-studded party, he knew he had made the right choice. For the first time in years, he could look at himself in the mirror without shame. Mark's decision to step away from Diddy's world came with consequences far more pervasive than he initially anticipated. For weeks after the exposé was published, he lived in a haze of anxiety and paranoia. The world he had been part of wasn't just about parties and celebrities. It was a labyrinth of influence, secrecy, and veiled threats. And leaving that world wasn't something many people attempted without repercussions. He began to notice subtle changes in his daily life. The easy camaraderie he once enjoyed with colleagues in the entertainment industry had evaporated. Invitations to industry events once flooding his inbox had stopped altogether. His social media accounts became quiet battlegrounds, as anonymous users accused him of fabricating his story or of being a disgruntled employee trying to tear down a successful figure. One night, as Mark walked home from a local cafe, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. He didn't think much of it until he saw it again the next day, parked in a different location near his apartment. At first, he convinced himself it was just a coincidence. But when the same vehicle appeared outside the gym he frequented, unease began to claw at him. Mark decided to be cautious. He changed his daily routines, taking alternate routes home, leaving his phone behind on certain errands, and even staying at a friend's house for a few nights. But the SUV wasn't the only thing that unsettled him. His phone began acting strangely. Texts he sent would vanish before reaching their recipient. Emails he knew he'd received would disappear from his inbox. Once his phone rang, and when he answered, the line was silent except for the faint sound of breathing. It became clear to Mark that someone didn't want him to feel safe. He didn't know if it was Diddy's team, powerful figures in the industry, or others he had unknowingly crossed, but the message was unmistakable: stop digging, or else. Despite the growing pressure, Mark couldn't let the matter rest. He felt a moral obligation to follow through, to shine a light on the broader culture of exploitation he had uncovered. What he had seen wasn't just about one man or one set of parties. It was a systemic problem deeply rooted in an industry that thrived on power imbalances. Determined to gather more evidence, Mark reached out to others who had worked in similar roles. Many were hesitant to talk, but a few cautiously opened up. One was a former event planner who had organized parties for another high-profile figure in the music industry. She spoke of similar unspoken rules, of ensuring a steady stream of young, beautiful women at events, and of being asked to look the other way when things seemed off. Another was a DJ who had played at several high-profile events. He described how certain areas of the venues were always off-limits, even to staff, and how guests who entered those spaces often emerged looking uneasy or disoriented. He also mentioned rumors of heavy drug use and transactions that went far beyond casual partying. Mark compiled their accounts, carefully cross-referencing details to ensure their credibility. What emerged was a disturbing picture of an industry where power and excess often blurred the lines of consent and morality. He realized that his own experiences, troubling as they were just the tip of the iceberg. But as he delved deeper, Mark began to grapple with a question that haunted him. How much of himself was he willing to sacrifice for the truth? His decision to speak out had already cost him his career and his sense of safety. Pursuing the matter further could put him in even greater danger. Yet he couldn't ignore the stories of those who had been silenced, the countless young women who had been pulled into a world they didn't fully understand until it was too late. One day, while sifting through his growing archive of notes and recordings, Mark received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. The message was brief. "You're on the right track, but be careful. There are people watching who won't hesitate to protect their secrets." Attached to the email was a file containing a list of names, prominent figures in the entertainment industry, along with dates and locations that aligned with some of the events Mark had worked on. The file also included screenshots of emails and text messages, many of which appeared to corroborate the accounts he had collected. Mark's first instinct was to contact the journalist who had published the original exposé, but he hesitated. The stakes were higher now, and he wasn't sure he could trust anyone. Instead, he decided to keep digging on his own, using the information in the file to build a more comprehensive case. The deeper he went, the more he realized just how entrenched the problem was. It wasn't just about parties, it was about a culture of unchecked power that permeated every level of the entertainment industry. Agents, managers, publicists, and even law enforcement played roles, whether actively or passively, in enabling the behavior Mark was uncovering. The web was vast and complex, and untangling it felt like an impossible task. One night, as he pored over the file, Mark's apartment was plunged into darkness. The power outage didn't seem to affect the rest of the building, and his unease deepened when his laptop abruptly shut off despite being fully charged. He tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't boot. When he checked his phone, he found that it too had been wiped. Mark's heart raced as he realized what was happening. Someone was trying to erase his work, or at least scare him into stopping. He quickly retrieved a hidden backup drive containing his research and left his apartment, heading to a friend's house across town. He couldn't stay in one place for too long, not when it was clear he was being targeted. Living out of a suitcase, Mark became more determined than ever to see his work through. He reached out to advocacy groups that supported survivors of exploitation and abuse, sharing his findings in the hopes that they could help amplify his message. He also began working with a legal expert who specialized in whistleblower protection, ensuring that he had some level of security if his identity were exposed. As Mark's story gained traction, more people came forward with their own accounts of exploitation within the industry. Some were former assistants or staff members like him, while others were artists who had experienced the darker side of fame firsthand. Their stories painted a harrowing picture of an industry that often prioritized profit and image over humanity. For Mark, the journey was both empowering and exhausting. He had started as a party recruiter, someone whose job was to create joy and excitement, only to discover the shadows lurking behind the glitz and glamour. Now, he was part of a larger movement to hold the industry accountable, to demand change in a world that had long operated without oversight. But the fight was far from over. Mark knew that the forces he was up against were powerful and resourceful. The threats against him hadn't stopped, and he remained hyper-vigilant, aware that his actions had made him a target. Yet he also knew that he couldn't turn back. As the months turned into years, Mark's work began to make a difference. Policies were implemented at some agencies and event planning companies to prevent exploitation, and more survivors felt empowered to share their stories. The industry was far from perfect, but cracks had begun to form in the wall of silence that had protected its darker corners for so long. For Mark, the journey was bittersweet. He had lost much in his pursuit of the truth: his career, his sense of security, and many of his former friendships. But he had gained something far more valuable: a sense of purpose. He had used his position of privilege to shine a light on injustice, and in doing so, he had become a voice for those who had been silenced. Looking back, Mark often thought about the parties he had organized, the nights filled with music, laughter, and excess. They felt like a lifetime ago, a distant memory of a world he had once been captivated by. But now he saw them for what they truly were. Illusions, masks for a reality that was far more complex and troubling than he had ever imagined. Mark knew he might never fully escape the shadows of his past, but he was at peace with his decision. He had discovered the truth, and though it had shocked him to his core, it had also set him free. And in the end, that freedom was worth everything. Mark's newfound purpose came with an unexpected realization. The system he had been part of for so long wasn't just built on exploitation, it thrived on it. The industry didn't merely tolerate the shadows, it depended on them. It became clear to him that his role as a party recruiter had been part of a larger machine, one that maintained its facade of glamour while feeding off the vulnerabilities of those desperate to belong. As he continued his work exposing the truth, Mark found himself uncovering stories that went beyond parties and exclusive events. He began to learn about the lengths some figures in the entertainment world went to in order to maintain their power. There were stories of young hopefuls lured by promises of stardom, only to be manipulated into signing contracts that left them trapped, voiceless, and vulnerable. Agents and executives wielded their influence like weapons, using it to silence dissent and protect their reputations at any cost. What haunted Mark most were the survivors' stories. They were vivid, raw, and heartbreaking. Young women and men who had been exploited, belittled, or discarded when they no longer served a purpose. For many, the trauma lingered long after their careers in entertainment ended, a shadow that followed them into every relationship and opportunity. Mark realized that their pain wasn't isolated. It was systemic, woven into the very fabric of an industry that prized appearance over humanity. One particular account stayed with him. A woman named Sierra, who had once been a rising star in the fashion world, came forward with her story. She had attended one of the parties Mark had organized in the past. Though he hadn't known her at the time, Sierra described the subtle yet insidious ways she was drawn into a dangerous situation, how industry insiders flattered her, promised opportunities, and introduced her to influential people. When she expressed discomfort or wanted to leave, she was brushed off with reassurances or subtle threats about how leaving could ruin her career. Listening to Sierra's story, Mark felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't known her, but he had been part of the system that brought her into that room. He had curated those guest lists, chosen the venues, and ensured the parties maintained their aura of exclusivity. He couldn't erase the past, but he could help ensure it didn't repeat itself. Driven by these accounts, Mark expanded his efforts. He partnered with advocacy groups to create educational campaigns aimed at young artists, models, and entertainers. The campaigns focused on recognizing red flags, understanding power dynamics, and knowing one's rights. He also began speaking at industry panels, using his first-hand experience to challenge the norms and demand accountability from those in positions of power. As the years passed, Mark's work began to make ripples. The industry's gatekeepers couldn't ignore the growing chorus of voices calling for change. Some companies implemented stricter codes of conduct and transparency policies, while others faced public backlash for their complicity. Mark knew the fight was far from over, but every small victory felt like a step toward dismantling the structures that allowed exploitation to flourish. Mark had gone from being a recruiter of glamorous illusions to a builder of uncomfortable truths. His journey wasn't about redemption, it was about responsibility. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could help others see the cracks in the facade. And in those cracks, he hoped a new kind of light would shine. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on being a recruiter for Diddy's exclusive parties? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.